research, and I hope that I will not repeat things that Amos has already said. Please remember what our goal is: a Jewish, democratic, secure and moral state in recognized borders with international recognition based on an a Jewish majority. That's what we're trying to reach. As we said before, we are feeling that we are at a status quo, although we are not actually in a status quo. Reality is constantly changing, and in fact, what we are sensing, what we are feeling, the scenarios that we have investigated during this research and the trends, we are actually down a slippery slope, and we are heading towards a reality of a one state. I don't want to describe that reality. You can describe it however you like. We used Pnina to describe this reality for us. What is one state? People talk about it, but people don't actually understand the meaning of it all the way. And it means we have two more new issues. It threatens the idea of the Zionist logic that we are aspiring to, and it also creates a sort of catch-22 situation where if we one day were to wake up and decide that we want to travel somewhere, we will not be able to, because we will be stuck in a situation that we can no longer get out of, areas that we cannot leave, all sorts of knots that we will not be able to untie. And we want to create a movement of leaving, exiting this catch-22 situation. So the work that we have done, we did not come to it with one specific goal in mind. We came completely open-minded. We wanted to see and look at all the options. And the word options or alternatives, people say if you say it too much, people misunderstand you. So you know what I mean. We will look at each and every one of these options and we will see where they're headed. And we did another work, by the way, we did three projects this year. Gaza, which unfortunately no one actually accepted our recommendations. Scenarios, we looked at possible scenarios in the Palestinian arena, and again, nobody has accepted our recommendations. I hope this one has a different future in store for it. We have looked at a long range or a series of scenarios and options, both scenarios and options, because some of these scenarios actually stem from the way that Israel should ostensibly be choosing its path and what the products and results will be. And we actually selected 12 options. I know that's very popular today, and I've met some people, and they're very good people who are promoting ideas like a federation or confederation, the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, or the Palestinian-Jordanian Confederation. And one expands two states, two distinguished states with an open border. There are all sorts of ideas on the table at present, and we found three things that keep repeating themselves. And I don't want to go into detail about everything. If you want to read, you can read the entire booklet we published, but there are three things that come up in all options. One, we need to make such difficult decisions that they are so much more complicated than a two-state solution, and Amos told us all why it's so difficult to make these decisions. And another thing is that the implementation process is so complicated, and we cannot go for complicated implementation processes. We need them to be simple. And the third thing that also keeps emerging when we look at all of these options is that we cannot, over the long run, ensure Israel's security situation as it is today, the security stability that is currently based on two very fundamental aspects. The first is our operational freedom of movement, the campaign, our counterterrorism campaign, where we do not allow terrorism to emerge from the West Bank, unlike Gaza, because Gaza has actually been neglected effectively. And the second thing is that allowing the Palestinian population to actually go into their daily lives and not do other things, and to have their lives better. So these are the two main aspects, and these are really the two main advantages of this outline. So I don't want to go into too many details, because these scenarios and the feasibility of these scenarios and the reality that they lead to, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. So we outlined all sorts of scenarios, and we selected which of these options actually survives the future scenarios, and we have reached a conclusion, by the way. Some people like it, some people don't like it so much, and the conclusion we have come to is that the most stable option in the long run is to actually be two distinct entities. One might call it a two-state solution. However, what the problem is that we cannot actually reach an agreement. The minimum and maximum don't converge. So, of all the options that we looked at, we took the positive parameters and we tried to put them together, striving for a two-state reality, trying to separate the populations, to try and reach understandings with the Palestinian Authority, with the Palestinian leaders. And by the way, we have not worked here only at the Institute. We have met Palestinians, we have sent people to Arab states, we have met with people overseas. And if the Trump plan comes out, then you'll be seeing some of the similarities there. And we also went into the Israeli political system, so we weren't here completely disconnected in the ivory tower of 40 Chaim Lebanon Street. But we wanted to get to understandings with the Palestinians, to start making moves here today that we can do without waiting for anyone. And by the way, we're not going against anyone. We're not trying to leave anyone behind or hurt anyone. We are working towards something positive, not against something negative, and also to get the regional factor in place. So I was talked about ways very nicely, and if we look at this permanent agreement ways, then we tried to travel toward the permanent agreement, but we reached an obstacle. There is a gap in the core issues, and so we tried another route. We tried to go to other interim agreements. We went there, but then we ran into another obstacle because the Palestinians were worried that the interim agreements will become permanent. So then we tried another route, which is sort of like a regional path, which everyone likes to sell to us. They're all saying we are going to have a regional agreement, it's actually on our doorstep, but I'm sorry, it's just all rubbish. They're not willing to do anything without us making very big concessions. With the Palestinians, there will be no regional agreement. Instead of or before the Palestinian one, it's not going to stand on its own 2 feet. And then we also had other ideas like the roadmap or the interim, or rather the temporary border state, and we wouldn't hear of it. And we also did the disengagement unilaterally, and then we actually left it all to terrorism, and we will not do it again. We will not leave the territory to the terrorists. So we want to move ahead. We want to go another road. We want a future option by splitting, but also to see the target, to see the goal, and see how we can become two distinct entities. And I'll tell you, I don't care if the Palestinians call themselves an entity, an autonomy, Mesopotamia, or a country, a proper state. I want Israel to be a Jewish, democratic, secure, and moral state with recognized, clear borders. And I don't care what the Palestinians decide to call themselves. It's their problem, not ours. So what are we saying? And Amos has defined that. We are in an era where we have all the strategic advantages to make progress, to move forward. A supportive U.S. administration. Also, we have the Arab states who want to learn from us. They're a bit more open towards us today than they have been. The Palestinians are not the same as they were. It is not the major conflict here in the region. Most of the population in Israel, and if you like, Tzipi will answer some questions on this, most of the population here in Israel, yes, there is a decline, but between 55 and 60% still support the two-state solution, and almost 80% want to be completely part from the Palestinians. Don't like this mess, this mix. And the international community is still trying to promote some sort of path. They understand something very important, that we cannot resolve this conflict in one go. To bring all the issues, put them all on the table and solve them all at the same time. Even the Europeans, those who are living in a completely different world, they have realized it's impossible. And we are strong enough, and we can move forward, and we can start to take steps toward our future, and therefore we think it is the time to act. As I've said, our idea essentially is a combination of three important things all coming together. We're talking about arrangements and agreements with the Palestinians, understandings of the Palestinians. We want them to realize that this process is in their favor rather than against them. And we also want to make progress. It's time to start taking steps forward. We want to ensure everyone realizes that we are insistent, that we don't want to live in a world of images, but rather in a world of actions. And that's why we're going to start taking action, and we're going to try and convince the region to lend us their support and to provide support for the Palestinians to move along and ahead with us, because they can gain the support and help of the Arab world. And here are the principles of this plan, as Amos has mentioned. It has initiative, it has clear intentions, unlike what we are doing today. It is a gradual process where we can constantly check that we are still heading in the right direction. At any point we will stop on the way will be better than what we have now, because it will open up new options for the future, new alternatives. And we are taking away the veto on the one hand, but also trying to synchronize and coordinate the Palestinians as much as possible. Someone asked me and said it's not a solution. Well, I don't know if it's a solution, but it's a road, it's a path, it's a way that will help us change reality and create a new one where we part ways. Another thing is that we are taking initiative. We no longer respond. In recent years, we only respond. We are not proactive. We need to define our territorial demographic goals and objectives rather than sweeping them under the rug. I will show you that in a few minutes. We prefer to have coordination and understanding and agreement if possible. We will be supported by the United States. By the way, people ask me, how does that work with Trump's deal? Well, actually it works very well. And if he ever presents it, then you'll see that it's very similar. As I said, there's a good Arab atmosphere, a positive one. And finally, we're not giving the Palestinians assets. We are relieving ourselves of burdens, of the moral burden of their dependence upon us, and certainly from the demographic burden. So what's the idea? The idea is to stop the current trend, and I'm moving ahead because the politicians are knocking on the door to talk about that. And the outline is a gradual one that is constantly designed to improve Israel's position. As Amos said, we have taken the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, depending on how you like to call it, according to your approach. And by the way, we have completely detached Gaza, or disconnected Gaza from this outline, because Gaza is a problem that we currently cannot resolve. It's a kind of disease where we have to sort of dull the ache of the symptoms, but if we were to bring it into the equation, it will only make more of a mess. So we want separation, we want differentiation. Differentiation is what we are doing, and separation is what's happening with the Palestinians. I will talk about the area in a minute, but as I've said, we are not letting go of our operational freedom of activity. We are not leaving behind any territory for terrorists to go into. We are minimizing control. We are reinforcing the facilities and infrastructure of the Palestinians. We are distinguishing between blocks of settlement, which we view in the future as part of the State of Israel, which we must fight for, and those settlements that are deep within these areas and are very isolated, and we should even freeze construction there so that we can stop the facts on the ground. And at this point, we're not talking about refugees or any of the permanent agreement core issues. This is not a permanent agreement. This is a path that will lead us to a better future. What is the idea? The idea is that we have the yellow area here, which is the Palestinian area. It's A and B, pretty much 40%, and we decided to use an illustration. I mean, of course, we have accurate maps, but we didn't want to show these accurate maps because then they'll start fighting. Why is this here? Why is this in? Why is this out? Why is the line here and not there? So we're just using an illustration, an idea. The idea is that we took A and B, which are the Palestinian areas. It doesn't really make a difference which one. They're not very different from one another these days, and we're going to give them, we're going to allow Palestinians to form a basis for a future Palestinian state there. And then we took another up to 25% of land in Area C for the development of Palestinian infrastructure and economic projects. These will be given to the Palestinians in the future without evicting or evacuating our settlements. In these areas, again, we can have infrastructure, we can have plants, factories, roads, anything that is required in order to develop the Palestinian economy and to help them start to build their future, to establish their own state with international help. We have talked with the international elements. They have offered an international bank mechanism to ensure that the money contributed by the world will not go to bad use. And within this area, we have built a plan, and we actually put it together 20 years ago when I was in the IDF. We called it Everything Flows. How do we create the flow of traffic in the Palestinian areas? And this is a kind of transport system to enable territorial contiguity, to reduce friction between the different populations, and to remove obstacles to economic development. And we're actually distinguishing between, as I've said, the settlement blocks. We want the blocks to be part of the future state of Israel, and we are not now annexing anything, because annexing processes will make the Palestinians leave the table angrily. So we do want them here in the picture, but we are distinguishing between settlement blocks that will be in the future state of Israel and those areas that are isolated. And here we recommend, again, freezing the construction. This freezing actually has two purposes. The first purpose is to prove that Israel is serious, that is not just trying to sell stories. One of the things that we're worried about at the Institute is that we meet with people around the world and it feels like we're just selling rubbish, selling tales, high tales. And what we're trying to also do is to minimize the sort of the catch-22 situation, so that in the future we'll be able to do a lot of things rather than be confined to the facts on the ground. And the last thing that we did is that we said we need to ensure the security control of Israel. So we actually marked special areas where we will not allow the Palestinians to have control, not even civil control. And that is the Jordan Valley, that is other strategic sites that we will be in control of, and that is how we will be reorganizing the territory. The idea is, instead of today's ambiguity, today we don't know if it's 2 states, not 2 states, are we going to be talking to Hamas in Gaza or not? Do we want a Palestinian Authority or not? Do we want them to be functional or dysfunctional? Everything is very ambiguous. No, we want to clearly state Israel's interests and present them on the map, and to start by implementing them so that this will become our reality. In terms of security and the security response, there is an entire chapter on security, and we made sure that security will not be jeopardized. I will not go into that right now because we don't have enough time. There is another issue that we talked about. We had a very big challenge with that. We had a Palestinian group with whom we did some of this work, and they were very cooperative, by the way, I can tell you, until the American embassy was moved and relocated to Jerusalem, and then the doors were closed. Until that point, they were on board, they were even willing. And by the way, we don't need to sign contracts. We just need to reach understandings and agreements. And it doesn't have to be, in the big town square explaining these things, because the Palestinians are worried about that. So we actually looked at 3 types of Palestinian Authority. The first is very similar to today's, but a functioning one. The second is in a Palestinian Authority that is hostile. And by the way, it is better for us, the hostile one, than the third option, which is a sort of crumbling Palestinian Authority. Those who strive toward one of the options was cantonization. Those who strive for cantonization, it's in fact really taking all the burden upon ourselves. Again, that is something we really should be avoiding. So that we're actually doing everything in our power to make sure that we can cooperate with the Palestinian Authority as much as possible, to provide them with a horizon, because as Amos said, if we want to go back to the negotiating table and they want to go back to the negotiating table, let's do that. Let us bolster their everything they've got. And by the way, according to the way that things are between us now, the more they do, the less we do. And if they don't do enough, we'll have to go in and do things. And to prevent Hamas from taking over the bank, the West Bank. There is an entire chapter on economics. I can't go into that now, but it's very detailed in our outline. In the long run, we want to again separate also on the economic level, and we have an interest to help the PA economy because, as I've said at the beginning, the better the situation will be there, so will our lives be better here in Israel. There's a matter of the regional aspect. We have sent people to meet with the relevant countries, and anyone who thought that we could bypass the bilateral agreement, well, we were told that it's impossible. They want us to talk about a two-state solution. They want us to address positively the Arab initiative and to move forward rather than just talk. And then they'll be willing to do their part, which is mostly provide financial support and give them securities and guarantees that they are not going to be neglected along the way and abandoned along the way. As I've said, the Gaza Strip we will not be discussing, or Jerusalem, even though we built an entire chapter on what happens when we do make progress and what can be done in Jerusalem. I don't want to go into that because we don't have time. How much longer have I got, by the way? Did the person next after me already come? Yes. Okay. So let's just wrap up and think. Usually we have a tendency to say, what are we giving the Palestinians and what are we getting, right? We're always doing this math. What are we getting? We're always giving. Well, first of all, we need to strengthen and make sure that our country, that our state is democratic, Jewish, secure and moral. We want to choose the best path for us and also be able to do that in the future as well. We want to take away the veto right of anyone around us who is trying to minimize our options. We want to reduce control and friction with another population. We are not the kind of nation that is characteristically or typically good for controlling another nation. We want legitimization, we want cooperation and coordination with the Arab world, we want to get the world on board getting to rehabilitate Gaza, and we're not going into the explosive issues of the Holy Basin, of the right of return, of evacuating settlements. It's not a solution what we are offering. It is a path for a future of options. And therefore, we think that the reality that will be created on the ground will be better. And by the way, even if we stop somewhere along the way, we'll still be better off than we currently are. And the next thing is that we want to be internationally recognized for these processes that we put in place. It is a possibility, it is a course of action that of all the ones that we have examined and looked into and made scenarios for and so on and so forth, this is the only path that we felt we could move forward with. And we are all in favor of making progress, because if we are in stagnation, if we stand still, we actually go back and we go down a slippery slope we don't want to go down. And enough. Thank you very much.
I'd like to call upon the Minister of Education and the Diaspora, MK Naftali Bennett.